Good evening, everyone. I'm Mike Durrell here at Mysterious Bookshop, and we are coming to you live from the Gardenia Room in the basement of the Mysterious Bookshop. Tonight, we're going to talk with the author Charles Todd. It's Ian Rutledge time again, and we have a new one, A Game of Fear, that's just come out from Morrow.
Yep, William Morrow.
William Morrow Publishing. We have signed copies here at Mysterious. I'm waving it all around, but I can't remember where the frame is. There it is. That's good. So we're going to talk with Charles about his new Ian Rutledge adventure, parse that a little bit, see what's going on for the future. And welcome to everyone who is tuning in on our Facebook page or on YouTube through the good people at StreamYards. First of all, Charles, I'm sure all of us here at Mysterious and everyone in the mystery community would like to offer condolences on the recent passing of your mother and writing partner. And we're all very saddened to hear that. But congratulations on the new book on a slightly positive note.
Thank you very much. It was the last Ian Rutledge that Caroline and I worked on together. We actually turned it into HarperCollins Morrow in February of last year. So had to get it through the edit and production process, but it came through just fine.
Good. It certainly did. I just finished it and quite enjoyed it. Now, I understand this is the 24th Ian Rutledge adventure. Does that seem like a reasonable count?
You're absolutely correct. And if when the next Bess Crawford mystery comes out, that'll make a total of 40 books in print.
An impressive track record, no question.
I don't know how he did it.
How did that happen? Now, I'm sure a lot of people are wondering, what's coming? Will you continue the Rutledge or Crawford series? Will you go in a new direction? Have you not decided? What might we look forward to?
Well, as I said earlier, that my number one priority was getting Game of Fear out as on time and as complete as possible. And I think we accomplished that goal with the fine people at William Morrow. And right now we're working with the edits for the Bess Crawford mystery that we're hoping will be out later on this year. We wrote Game of Fear in February of last year. We turned it in. And then in July of last year, we turned in the current or soon to be Bess Crawford mystery. So my first priority has been getting those two through the process and actually onto bookshelves. And once we finish with the edit process for this new Bess, then I'm going to have an opportunity to take some time and really concentrate on what can be done. You know, Caroline and I established quite a tradition of quality and set a certain standard for ourselves that we tried to live up to.
No question about it.
And it's vitally important to me to make sure that whatever's done lives up to that standard. And so, yes, I will, once the Bess gets finished, I will be attempting a Rutledge book. I want to run it by our agent, Lisa Gallagher, and our editor at HarperCollins to make sure that it does indeed live up to that standard. If it doesn't, I don't want to print it.
Commendable. And certainly quite understandable. Now, the Rutledge series is set in the vicinity of the First World War, where he was damaged, shall we say?
Yes.
And I noticed that in this, as in most of the books, the Rutledge's conscience, you might say, sidekick Hamish is there. I felt in my own reading, I just finished it the other day, I felt that there was a little bit less of him in the story of Hamish than there had been previously. However, I was looking at some reviews and some other people say there's more of him than there have been recently. So I'm confused. I thought there was a bit less. And interestingly, I took away from the new one, A Game of Fear, that Rutledge was almost reluctant to listen to Hamish and kind of elbowed him out of the way a couple times. And maybe he's not quite so in tune with him at this point. Am I reading that incorrectly, or is that what happened?
You know, it's interesting. That's been an ongoing conversation throughout the series, and a lot of it depends on the mystery itself,
Mm-hmm.
The setting, the characters, and what's taking place throughout the book as to how Hamish gets involved or doesn't get involved. So you're not alone, but we've heard that before, where some people feel that he's very much a presence. Some people say, well, I didn't see as much of him this time. But I think the most important thing is when Caroline and I came up with Hamish, actually through Rutledge, our main goal was not to use him as a gimmick or his PTSD, or what they call the shell shock,
Yeah.
but to use it as an integral part of the story that we were trying to tell, rather than just an attachment that happened to be along with it. So I think if you look on the balance of the series, you'll see Hamish's partnership ebb and flow depending on the book and depending on the story. And I think that's what Caroline and I both felt was the best way to use Hamish. There are some times when Hamish kind of has to slap Rutledge around, and sometimes where Rutledge feels very strongly about what he's trying to accomplish and kind of pushes him to the back.
Everybody needs a wake-up call every now and then. Now, in a Game of Fear, it concerns a lady who apparently has witnessed a murder, but the culprit has a distinct advantage or disadvantage with the law because that person was killed in the war. So what the devil is going on? There's we find Rutledge in investigating this kind of call to action, so to speak. The lady in question is very prominent in the society, and I got to wondering, would Rutledge have been called in? Would Scotland Yard have even bothered if it was, say, a woman of the lower classes? We all know that in the Britain and colonial India of 100 years ago, there was a rigid class structure. It's still there. It might be a little less, but goodness knows the Brits make no bones about having a class structure. Had the situation been different, did you? So the question really is: did you deliberately make the quote unquote witness to the quote unquote murder a posh person, so that the other elements would have been more likely to come in, which they wouldn't have had it been someone of the lower classes?
Yes, but kind of no. Yes, in terms of, because there were people of a certain class who had the ability to rub elbows in the same social circles as the chief constable for the area, who ultimately decided whether or not to call in Scotland Yard. And this is most definitely a case that, had it been somebody less prominent with the crime as it took place and reported, probably wouldn't have risen to their attention. But then I look back at, look at the last book of Fatal Lie. The person, they found a body floating in a river and didn't even know who that person was or where he came from or anything about him. And Rutledge had to start with basically nothing. So different books, we use different tools to bring it. And if you remember from the beginning, Markham, just like Bowles, being the boss that he is always looking for ways to send Rutledge off on a snipe hunt to get him out of his hair. And as a matter of fact, if you remember at the beginning, the other people in Rutledge's office are making fun of him as he's heading out on his new case, and Markham's standing there letting it happen instead of calling the other officers to task for tomfoolery, so to speak. So it's kind of a mixture of the two, but definitely Lady Benton is a person, not only the kind of person that would come to the attention of the chief constable, but because Lady Benton being her property being right next to where an air base had been during World War I, and her hospitality to the officers and men, giving them an opportunity to come onto her land to rest, relax, and quote unquote take their mind off the war between action. So a debt of gratitude was definitely owed to Lady Benton. And so when she raised this alarm, especially where it involved Captain Nelson, who was a member of the Royal Air Corps, that definitely added a little urgency to calling in Rutledge.
One thing that struck me, especially towards the beginning of the book, Lady Benton, her story is, that of these ghostly happenings outside of her window that she was watching was not at first greeted with universal acclaim. A lot of people thought she had gone around the bend from all the tragedies she had. Some people thought she was just, her eyes were playing tricks on her. She hallucinated this and that. Did you intend to have a little element of maybe this isn't what, maybe she didn't see what she thought she was, an element of disbelief of that main character in the beginning? Eventually people come around to see what has happened. But did you kind of plan for that lack of belief in the beginning that would eventually?
Oh, absolutely. If you remember when, the next day after witnessing this, the first thing she did was call the local constable and have him come out and take a look. And there's no blood. There's no tracks in the grass. There's no sign of a disturbance. There's no evidence whatsoever that anything took place in the very spot where she says she saw this happen. Number two, there's no body. And it's really hard to have a murder investigation if there's no body. It's not impossible, but it makes it extremely difficult even today.
That's right.
So, and then she has this story that she witnessed Captain Nelson commit this murder, and she is adamant that it was Captain Nelson that she saw. And yet, according to military records, Captain Nelson was killed during World War I, and there's no way in the June of 1921 that he was still around after hostilities ceased in 1918. So there is absolutely nothing to this story as far as physical evidence to say, well, okay, maybe her story doesn't make sense, but there is at least this to hang our hat on, so to speak. There really isn't. And so naturally, the people of the town, Lady Benton's a recent widow. She lost her son. So she's grieving. There's the experience of all the men that came over and accepted her hospitality who never returned, that she had become acquainted with. So naturally, there were some feelings in the area that maybe all of this trauma she had experienced had finally pushed her around the bend, so to speak.
Well,
And that's what we wanted. I
yeah,
mean, we, it, the funny thing is, whether it's a young boy fishing and pulling up a dead body in a fatal lie, or a situation like this, we're always looking for something that's impossible. We did that with No Shred of Evidence, if you remember that one. The only problem is you come up with this fantastic idea with this premise, especially, and then you've got to figure it out because your readers kind of like it when you solve the mystery and solve it in a believable manner.
believability is key.
Yeah. If they get to the end and go, yeah, he did it, but that doesn't make sense,
Mhm.
then we feel like we've cheated the reader. We've always felt that it's a race between us and the reader. We want to get to the end first.
Mhm.
But when you catch up and get to the end, we want you to be able to look back at the book and go, ah, that makes sense. All right, I'll buy it.
Yes. Well, I noticed when I began reading the book just last week, and the nebulous nature of the incident that Lady Benton described, I started thinking, oh my goodness, is this going to be a ghost thing? Is this a supernatural horror story? What's going on here? Did you intend sort of quasi supernatural elements as a bit of a misdirection? Because
Absolutely. That's why we set
there's certainly concrete goings on there.
I mentioned this earlier at the very beginning of the book when the other officers in the office are making ghostly gallows
Right.
sounds as Rutledge is being sent off.
Right.
Everybody sees it as a lark because it really is. Markham sent him on one heck of a wild goose chase, and yet somehow it's Rutledge's tenacity and his knowledge and understanding of people that enables him to solve the crime. That's been our backbone throughout the entire series. It may take him a while to get there, hopefully 90,000 words, but it may take him a while to get there, but he sticks with it and tries to keep an open mind rather than jumping to conclusions. And that's why when he first meets Lady Benton, he's really surprised that she's certainly self-aware and seems very sharp and mentally intact.
Right. Quite calm, cool, and collected from
Even though her story's outlandish, she doesn't seem like an outlandish person in when he actually does get a chance to meet her.
Well, let's touch on that for just a minute. You did allude to needing believable and plausible happenings and solutions to what's going on. Do you and I'd like to also say that those of you nice viewers who saw myself and Mr. Todd earlier this year, if I repeat myself, forgive me. How do you approach plotting? Are you do you start at the back like Agatha Christie and work your way forwards, or do you get yourself in a mess and have to write yourself out of a corner, or are you a pantser? You just kind of go as you go along, or you have it all plotted out a la Sinclair Lewis in the very beginning before you put hands to keyboards?
Caroline and I always believe that if you know how the book is going to end, why write it? So we start with the premise. We always said that the hardest part of writing a mystery is that first chapter, because that sets the foundation that everything builds on.
Sure.
And we have no idea as we're writing along who done it.
Any more than anyone else does.
No, we follow along as Rutledge pursues his investigation. And we do the same thing with Bess. If you talk to any of us seat of the pantsers, as they're called,
Yep.
we all have the same problem. I know Ian Rankin was saying this at an event one time. He said, it's a great concept until you get 80,000 words in, you've got 10,000 left, and you still have no clue who did it.
That would be a problem.
Yes. So you can back yourself into a corner, but it forces you to look back over the clues as they arise. One of the things that Caroline and I have never done is this, that let me put this caveat. What works for us doesn't work for everybody.
Of course.
Jeff Deaver is a fantastic author, and he does wonderful workshops, and he writes 250 pages handwritten rough draft before he even goes to the computer, and his books are fabulous. Absolutely like his books. So when I say this, sometimes people hear what an author says and go, oh, well, that's the way you're supposed to do it. Well, no, that's the way that works for us.
Right.
But we go back and we look and pay very careful attention to the clues as they're coming forward. That's why Caroline and I always wrote scene by scene. People would ask us, did you write chapter 2? She wrote, did you do this? No, we wrote it scene by scene. Once we got that first chapter done, depending on who got started first, they would write the next scene, send it via email, and then I'd tweak it or vice versa and ship it back. And then once we felt like that scene had been accomplished, then we'd say, okay, where would he naturally go next? From what he knows thus far, where is he going to go in search of more answers? And then we write that next scene and next scene and next scene. And so we don't put red herrings in. We don't say, oh, well, here's a spot for an important red herring, and we're going to put this in and make it look like, but no, it isn't. That what we do with Rutledge is, and Bess, is their first impressions and their first thoughts about what actually took place are quite oftentimes proved wrong as the investigation progresses, or in Bess's cases, the story progresses, and she gets to know more about the people that she's working with. And so, yes, there are going to be times where you're reading along and Rutledge is thinking to himself, I'm pretty sure it's this person. And then something else comes to light that feeds it. I have always been a big believer in Knox's laws. Have you ever heard of Knox's laws?
I don't think I did.
Knox wrote what I think was a list of laws that are really a Bill of Rights for the reader. You know, don't bring in a Chinaman unless it's absolutely needed. You know, don't bring in a character near the end of the book who ultimately is the guilty party. There were several, I think there's 10 Knox's laws. And we always tried to stay within that to make sure that, A, we wrote a good story. I don't care what else happens. You got to write a good story.
That's
and B, that we were fair with our readers.
Well, I think that in this adventure, especially as Rutledge doggedly investigates, he's very persistent, and he'll just keep at it and at it until he finds out what he wants to know. But one thing I took away from the entire series is that he's not a superhero. He's just a detective. He's a human. Sometimes, as you say, he's wrong. Sometimes he's totally gone off on a ridiculous tangent and has to get back into it. And he unwrapping layers of of deceit and information as he gets to them. Eventually, he'll get there, and it's really a tribute to his persistence and to your delineation of the character that makes it all work so effectively. Basically, what we have here is Rutledge uncovering more and more mayhem and more trouble, and what we really have is kind of a serial killer novel that's about the victims and not necessarily about the twisted nature of the killer. And I find that quite refreshing and very entertaining.
I'm not commenting specifically on this book. I'm always against spoilers, but as we've done before, things get complicated.
Yes. That is putting it mildly. I wonder if I could trouble you for just a moment to talk about the character Haldane. He seems to serve a slightly similar function as Hamish, in that he's kind of giving a whisper in the ear of Rutledge a little bit, in person in the case of Haldane, and in his subconscious in the case of Hamish. Can you speak a little bit to that character of Haldane and how he might compare?
Well, Rutledge has two characters like that. One is Haldane and the other one's Melinda Crawford.
Aha.
The only mutual character of the best in the Rutledge series is Melinda Crawford, who was a dear family friend of Rutledge's parents and is directly related to Bess Crawford. Over time with life experiences, you get to know different people and they become resources for you. Haldane is a person who has connections within the British government that are a little on the cloak and dagger side. And Haldane's the kind of person you really can't pin down as to what his official role is and what part he plays.
He seemed pretty murky.
And Rutledge doesn't particularly like owing Haldane a favor. He's very cautious about calling in Haldane to get his help, unlike Sergeant Gibson, for example, who he will very easily pick up the phone and ask him something. But Haldane, he saves for special occasions. He's had a recurring role, but he's not in every book. He's not in every two books. He just kind of wisps in and wisps out and sends, in some cases, Rutledge some information, sometimes sort of points him in a direction, and we're not really sure if Haldane's sending him on a wild goose chase or if it has any actual bearing. And yet at the same time, it's a useful vehicle, as you're aware. I'm walking dangerously close to the spoiler line.
Well, with that, I've spoken to some Rutledge readers and Rutledge fans, and some of them are pleading, give the poor guy a break in his personal life, for crying out loud. Let him have a little fun once in a while.
It was funny when we wrote in 2014, we wrote a book called A Fine Summer's Day. And it went back to that fine summer day in 1914. Rutledge hadn't gone to war. The Archduke hadn't been assassinated. Everybody was making plans, as was Rutledge, because he was getting engaged, and everybody was talking about going off to war and wearing nice uniforms and be home by Christmas kind of thing.
Yeah.
And, when we got to the end of the book, it was very difficult for us because it was, on the one hand, we realized how much about Rutledge we didn't know. we'd written about Rutledge, the character, after he suffered, but we hadn't really done, well, we hadn't done anything with who Rutledge was as a character before all had happened.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a learning experience. And then the other thing was we got to the end and we realized what we were sending him off to. That he finally completed what was necessary to come to the end of a fine summer's day, and then went off to join up and serve in the army in World War I. And so as the book drew to a close, we looked at it and said, geez, we're sending him off and we're going to be back to being pretty crappy to the guy.
Poor man.
But two things you have to remember. First of all, imagine if with 24 books in the series now, if we had put a couple of years in between, we would be, 90-year-old Ian Rutledge going off to solve a case from taking retirement once again. So one thing that we did in both the Bess and the Rutledge series is we put them pretty much back to back. So if you stop and think about it, if I remember correctly, Test of Wills takes place in May of 1919.
Okay.
We're now in June of 1921. So it's really been 2 years. The guy's not going to have a sudden bolt of lightning and everything's happily ever after. Plus, if it ended happily ever after, we'd have all kinds of problems. We've had some romantic opportunities for Rutledge throughout the series, and there are still some romantic opportunities. But my mother always used to say that picking someone for Rutledge was kind of like telling your son where to go to meet nice women. Ultimately, you had to put up with whoever he came home with.
Yep.
So the main thing is, when we wrote Bess was not designed to be Rutledge's wife, and Bess was not designed to cure Rutledge.
Good.
Bess has her own opportunities and interests. There's some entanglement there, especially through Melinda and the fact that they know each other, but that's pretty much it. And we'll have to see what happens.
That's the beauty of it. In A Game of Fear, I noticed that the perhaps more than in some of the other books in the series, the war itself, having concluded 2.5 years previously, is still like a blanket on society, a wet blanket on the flames of society, if you pardon the pretension, that it just affects everything. Even a few years down the road, everybody has lost someone or something. And like, for example, all of the women at the Abbey are widows or war widows, and it's just everywhere and all pervasive. Is it fair to say then that
not only did you have the victims of the war, you had the victims of the influenza epidemic?
Right, that's right. There's some of the terrible influenza in 1918 and 1919 that killed millions and millions and millions of people all over the world is alluded to several times in this, and that's just another part of the hell that life was. There was significant labor unrest. There were the Palmer raids for Reds, so to speak. There was influenza. There was the lingering hangover of the war. There was inflation. Everything was just falling apart. And a lot of people seem to think this was the beginning of the end of civilization as we knew it. Is it fair to say that this period of time is essential to the Rutledge stories? In other words, it's unlikely that we'll be seeing Rutledge in the Depression years or in World War II or in the Roaring Twenties or something like that. It's pretty much his identity to be in that time and place, yes?
He's a man of his times. Not only did all these people pass and die and everything else. But you have to understand too, England lost 15% of its total economic wealth as a result of World War One, and was deeply in debt. The Americans actually were sending money to Germany to help Germany pay its war reparations, but they weren't sending money to England. Even with World War II, with the Marshall Plan that helped with Germany and Japan and recuperation. I remember Caroline went to England for the first time in 1968. And there was still evidence of the damage that had been done to London in World War II in 1968, 20 years later.
Sure.
One of the ways that England tried to make up its budget shortfalls was the estate tax. All of a sudden, these people who had manor homes that had been passed down for generations now were owed a substantial amount in taxes on the estate. Plus, most of these estates, because all the staff had gone off to war, had fallen into disrepair. And it's incredible to me going back and looking at how many of the beautiful manor homes and things just absolutely turned to rubble. So it left a visual impact. I think one of the things we tried to do in the books, talking about the villages, is the roles of the quote unquote lord of the manor, so to speak. And that was beginning to disintegrate and affect the whole society of rural villages in England. And so the place was basically coming apart at the seams, and nobody seemed to know. Plus, you had the situation that the Windsors were extremely fortunate. The primary result of World War One was the end of monarchies in Europe.
Yes.
The Russians, the Germans, the Italians, the Austro-Hungarians, the sultans in Turkey, gone. All right. And all of a sudden, the Saxe-Coburg Gotha, who recently changed their name to Windsor as a result of World War One, felt very endangered. So here's a bedrock of British society, kind of on pretty shaky grounds, especially after what happened in Russia with Tsar Nicholas, and also remembering the fact that Kaiser Wilhelm, Tsar Nicholas, the King of England, they were all related.
Yes.
We knew each other.
It's positively incestuous.
And so you throw that in with the communist movement, which was spreading all over the place right after the war. The British people really got scared. And the worst part was when they opened up the voting right after the war, not only for women, but they changed the land ownership laws and basically opened up the elections to the majority of the population of England for the first time in history. And they were quaking in their boots for that first election because they didn't know what the people were going to decide.
I shouldn't wonder. To what extent did that expand the franchise? Was it before it was like landed, property owners?
Pretty much it was landed gentry, people of means and male. The British, during and right after, you had the suffragette movement before World War One, but the British gave the right to women to vote, but they had to be over 35 and have certain property and or monetary wealth in order to qualify, as well similar types of things. The original way that they had reworked the British government was that it was primarily landed. You had to own land
Right.
to vote.
Right.
And then they extended that a little bit because your bankers and everyone living in the big cities were suddenly left out. And so that made things complicated. But right after World War I, they basically opened it up to the majority of the plebiscite to vote in elections. And the government was extremely nervous. Right during the same time frame that we're talking about with Rutledge. So we have to be very careful. We could spend, 3/4 of this book talking about these kinds of things and the impact that they had on British society. So what we try to do is kind of give the overall impression, which is what led to your question of, it's kind of everything's falling down around the heads of people, and it is. And Rutledge is a part of that and a product of that. And so hopefully we're able to reflect that in how it impacts the person that he is. And yet it's still British society. Still got the stiff upper lip.
All about the stiff upper lip. So that really what we might conclude is that time and place is extremely fertile for situations that a fiction author might want to use and might be able to exploit, so to speak, in terms of plot and characterization.
Yeah, that's why I think the biggest pitfall for Caroline and I over the years is when you just have to say, all right, I know I wanted to go down this rabbit hole, but enough research is enough. It's time to start writing the book.
And you can, at this point, you must be able to recognize that point and say, all right, I've done enough research, let's write.
Well, you do, but as you're writing, you find where you have gaps. I didn't realize we started writing about an air base, and I was talking with Carol, and I said, what kind of planes are we going to have there?
Biplanes, I guess.
Well, yeah, but then I started doing some research. The British used 70 different types of airplanes.
Is that right? 70?
During World War I.
How about that?
Everybody thinks about the Sopwith Camel. They forget about the Sopwith Baby, the Sopwith Mouse, the Sopwith Gunboat, the Sopwith Sniper. There were all kinds of Sopwiths out there.
It's a good thing I'm not doing your research.
Yeah. So finally, we just, after going through it, we said, with what we have to cover here, the less we say about the type of airplanes, the better we are.
Wise decision.
But we were really happy. You can't really see it on the cameras here, to see the biplane on the cover of Game of Fear.
There it is.
Yeah. We actually, if you go to the Charles Todd website, there's a link to an article from the Muncie, Indiana paper. Caroline and I, through some friends, were able to go to a private airport and get an introductory flying lesson.
Oh, excellent.
Time in a 1920 Great Lakes biplane, literally canvas stretched over wood, biplane. It was a two-seater, so the instructor sat in the back, you sat up front. It was drizzling rain in November. You're sitting there at 3,000 feet, no parachute.
Oh,
There's
man.
no room for a parachute.
No.
Doing about 80 miles an hour with this big propeller blowing in your face.
That must have been something.
It was quite an experience. Wouldn't have traded it for my life. I went up, and Caroline went up, and Deanna went up, and we had a wonderful time.
It gives one a certain new respect for the pilots in those days, 100 years ago. That's no walk in the park.
It certainly does. And the gentleman who was giving the flying lesson, in addition to teaching us about the controls, I have more gauges on my car than that airplane had in the cockpit. But he took us flying over. We flew over a lake. We went over a farm, followed roads and fences, and you really got an understanding how they navigated. Actually, in World War I, Britain started taking all the roadsides down because during the Blitz in London, the Zeppelins would come over, get kind of lost because it was dark, drop a ladder, send the guy down on the ladder at an intersection. He'd read the street signs, climb back up, tell them where they were, and then they could navigate on. So
must have been a pretty long ladder you'd be clinging for dear life onto.
Very shortly after the Blitz started, they went through and they took down all the street signs, especially out in the country.
Sure. Well, I see Rutledge seems to have a kind of a talent for eventually getting to the crux of the matter, peeling back the layers of nonsense, getting to the culprit, and focusing. Now, without giving away any spoilers, I must say I didn't see the character of Bruce coming towards the end of the book to help. Might we see Bruce in future tales?
It's possible.
Yeah. You have to read the book, folks.
It's one of the difficult things when you get to an end of a book, because you spent quite a bit of time getting to know these characters. We really believe in listening to our characters as opposed to treating them like puppets on a string. There are times when characters do not want to cooperate. And when we get to the end of the book, it's very difficult because a lot of times we say goodbye to some characters we like. My mother, if I remember correctly, she met Daphne du Maurier one time in England. And she said, she mentioned one of the characters that was in one of her books. And she said, I always wondered whatever happened to so-and-so. And she turned around and smiled and she said, oh, they went away and got married very happily 2 counties away. And that was good enough.
Excellent. Well, we are getting down towards the finish here. Anybody has any questions to pass along to Charles, type them in the comments and we will pass what we can along. I was wondering a bit of a pedestrian question. Are the titles of the books selected in the editorial process, or do you know it going in, or is that the publisher's lookout, or?
That's a constant tug of war. The publisher would love to have a title before they even see the manuscript.
Natch.
We have a tradition. I have been doing some research and work for Rutledge number 25. And I have a folder on my computer called Rut 25. And the manuscript will be titled Rut 25 until you get to the end. And then we sit down and go, what are we going to name it? So the best mystery that's in editing right now is called Best 13.
Best 13 and Rutledge 25.
So once we get to the end of the book and have a feeling about how to make it pertinent, then we move forward with it. Some of them are easy. The Black Ascot was so easy because that's the first scene of the book
What
is
else?
the
Really?
Black Ascot in 1910. And so, yeah, that was easy. Some of the others, you rack your brains and go on the websites and see if anybody's used it already.
Title searches and stuff. Well, if any editors from Morrow are watching this, I dare you to call the next one Rut 25 and see what happens. I dare you. Come on, let's see if it's the title or what. All right. Well,
I did notice that the German translations are called Inspector Rutledge 6, and then the title in German.
That's interesting. Any blowback from the German publishers about maybe Germany doesn't come out so good in the tale set in World War II? I mean, World War I?
Actually, Germany is our best foreign translation seller. And I think it's because if you look closely at the books, we don't really take shots at the Germans.
That's very true. That's very true.
We talk about what happened as a result of the war more than the rights, wrongs, the political parts of what happened. Because really, truly, we're trying to describe what happened to everybody and how the repercussions. I found it very interesting. I was listening on the news this weekend. They were talking about Ukraine, and they were talking about a nation's right to self-determination. That was non-existent until the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. That was the first time that concept had been brought up in the establishment of Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia and all the different things. It was a nation's right of self-determination. And when I heard that comment coming right out of that treaty, it still amazes me how what took place in that war is still coming back to haunt us today.
Yes. It was such a tremendous upheaval. The world order was completely shattered and overturned. And as you say, we are still feeling the repercussions over a century later.
Yep.
Well, folks, we have been talking about the latest Ian Rutledge mystery, A Game of Fear, number 24 from Mr. Todd and the late Caroline Todd. And once again, condolences. Is there anything you'd like to share with our readers, with our viewers, I should say, before we wrap up? Either thing.
The one thing that I always go back to that meant a lot to Caroline, you could always tell she'd go to events and she'd get that sparkle in her eye. And you knew when she was thoroughly enjoying herself. When you sit in a small room with a computer, even as two authors, we never wrote in the same room because we get off track, but we never had a concept that what we were doing with the Test of Wills we didn't know about readers and fans and people who would actually enjoy the books. And yet that has been the most rewarding part. We have it was 25-year anniversary of A Test of Wills being published in August of last year. And over that time period, we have met some of the most wonderful people. Had an opportunity to meet and talk to and get letters from fans and everything else. And I have to say, I owe a sincere debt of gratitude to all the people who sent notes, sent cards, sent letters, everything when Caroline passed. It was a great deal of comfort to myself and to the family, and it really showed how Caroline in her lifetime was able to really reach out and touch the lives of so many people. And we'll see, but my goal is to continue that in the future.
Very good. We were certainly all saddened to hear of her passing, but she left behind a wonderful legacy. Entails the Rutledge series, the Bess Crawford series. The new one is just out. Bess Crawford coming at some point soon. You can get these here at mysteriousbookshop.com.
Hey, I heard a rumor that you have some actually signed by the author.
And it's no rumor. It's fact. We have copies signed by the author. That guy right there. Point this way, I guess. Never get. It's like working at a negative, everything.
Yes, it is.
But we have signed first editions of the new Ian Rutledge mystery, A Game of Fear by Charles Todd. We've been talking to the gentleman. We appreciate your taking the time so much to speak with us. And
I've enjoyed it. It's always a lot of fun to talk to you.
Thank you very much. It's our pleasure. Thank you for listening and watching, everyone who did. Drop us a line if you want to know more about the book or to pick up a copy or 10. And Charles, thank you so much. We'll be talking to you again very soon, I'm sure.
Bye now.
Good night, everybody.